Hello again, everyone. This is Jordan, back for video number 2 of my little web series that I'm going to be doing in regards to the patriotic state of affairs within our country and across the world. One of my favorite and most prolific authors, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, once famously said that it is much easier to fool someone than it is to realize that you have been fooled. Unfortunately, that follows almost everything that we know about current American history. So tonight, the topic that I'm doing was actually requested, and it is very, very timely given the day that will be happening tomorrow. Tomorrow marks the 18th anniversary of the worst terrorist attack in American history. You could also argue, though, that it is but one of many of the worst terrorist attacks in U.S. history. The fact is that as you go throughout American history, you start to realize a trend and a pattern of major events that have happened with lots of the same actors pulling the strings. So tonight I'm going to cover a myriad of topics, not in depth, unfortunately. There is far too much material for each one, but as I list them, these are but a scratch of the surface of things that you yourself can independently Google or YouTube or whatever other methods of research that you prefer. There are several more scholarly, but for those of you on the go, a simple Wikipedia article will actually confirm a lot of what I'm about to say tonight. So, as I stated in my first video, America had been infiltrated for quite some time. You have to accept that premise in order to get past anything else that I'm going to say tonight, because what I'm going to say tonight will absolutely ruffle feathers. I will likely be called crazy, insane, conspiracy theorist, blah, blah, blah. And you know, if the boot fits, I'm quite capable of wearing it. However, I believe that I have come to these conclusions after many, many years of researching this topic, mostly because I don't like to go along with what people tell me is the case. I try to think for myself, and that's not illegal yet. So if you're the same, I invite you to open your mind and just follow along. If you completely disagree and have evidence to prove me wrong, wonderful. Feel free to do so. So tonight I'm going to talk about some of the most popular conspiracy theories, including things like JFK, the Federal Reserve, and of course September 11th. So the archetypes of people that I'm going to be talking about, they tend to fit into this shadowy role, this shadow government aspect that you see on things like Hannity and whatnot. So it's collectively called the deep state. The deep state is another name for this political branch of the cabal, and the deep state has been in power for a very, very long time. Officially, they gained control over America's financial infrastructure when Woodrow Wilson, back in 1913, signed into law the Federal Reserve Act, in which all of American finances were privatized by a non-federal entity. So the Federal Reserve is, better known under the Rothschild family conspiracy of international banking. And what happens is essentially money is no longer actually tradable commodity. It is actually a promissory note. So on your dollar, you can pull out your dollar. It will say this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. What that simply means is it's a promise to pay, and that's at the basically the collateral of your labor. So your work, your labor is used, your income including as well, is all used to pay for these taxes, which are basically to go against the debt that the U.S. government owns to the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve was kind enough to lend the U.S. government its money. The U.S. dollar is not the U.S. dollar, and it has not been for quite some time. There was a phenomenally huge gold seizure that occurred during that time, in which people's actual physical gold, including bullion and bars and whatnot, was seized forcibly under threat of imprisonment and fine by the U.S. government. Okay, so the government came and purposely took by force all Americans' gold. that they had that was of a commodities version. So they weren't going through and pulling out people's gold teeth or whatnot, but anything that was a gold certificate, even, they took all of it. That's why Fort Knox exists. And so to replace that, people were issued bonds, etc. So America went off the gold standard and onto the value of the U.S. dollar, which we've seen inflation be just the most disgusting thing that could possibly happen to the American economy and affecting our gross domestic product. If you don't understand financing, that's okay. There's so much that I don't understand, but I at least get this big picture portion of it of what's happened to our monetary system. So this was the first place that the crooks gained power, was over the money. And if you own the money, you own everything. So from there, they, of course, used that money and funneled it in by spending hundreds of millions and then into billions and then overall into our nation's history, trillions of dollars into the military-industrial complex. You see, if you put together those pieces, right after that came World War I. World War I, of course, we were isolationist for a very long time. And then, there was the sinking of the Lusitania and a couple other things, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. None of that had anything to do with the United States until Germany said that they were going to start using their U-boats and targeting everyone. And so we said enough is enough, and we got into the war. And of course, we lost a lot of American lives, and a lot of people in the steel industry, like the Rockefellers, became fabulously wealthy. They used that money to then, of course, continue to oppress the system further. You had the Great Depression and the stock market crash soon after. Fast forward a little bit into World War II. Of course, the American steel industry is now a huge thing. You have the Industrial Revolution all throughout this time period here in the early beginning of the 1900s. Our ability to mass produce weapons had grown so expansive that, America just needed another war. So there is the conspiracy theory that news came about that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked. That news got to President FDR, who is a very, very corrupt and extremely progressive, radical leftist man. He heard the news that Pearl Harbor was about to be attacked. And the official story is that due to telegram delays and somebody just falling asleep and stuff like that, all these different string of events, unfortunately, Pearl Harbor just didn't get the news on time. Well, isn't that convenient? Because that was what got us invested into the war, and we didn't care about Hitler and his extermination policy of wiping off every non-Aryan person from the earth that he could think of. That's okay. We could sit idly by, but a lot of our servicemen die. Well, that got Americans' blood up. As you'll see, that's another thing that they were able to play off of, and did so on a much grander scale later. So at that time, Pearl Harbor was the largest terrorist attack that had ever happened, except there those people were armed and had a small chance to fight back. The Doolittle raid was a phenomenal answer back to that. But after we got into World War II, things started really changing because you had things like the inception of the CIA. Now, the CIA was founded September 18th, 1947. They have remained in power ever since. When you talk about the shadow government or about the deep state cabal, this is who we're talking about here. We're talking about people so entrenched into the occult that they have literally nothing but the satanic power behind them, if you will. I'll explain a little bit about that here with some of their known projects. These are just some of the many, many, many operations that the CIA has done covertly throughout their inceptional history. So one of the most famous was in 52, I believe, was Project Artichoke. Project Bluebird. Project Bluebird had in mind the concept of how to mass control a person. That evolved into Project Artichoke, which the CIA thought, hey, maybe if we can control somebody's mind, maybe we can make them involuntarily do an assassination. That's seriously the goal of that project. Look it up on Wikipedia. Again, that's Project Artichoke. Project Artichoke was the entire thing that the CIA focused on for a long, long time. It had actually been going on from 53 till 73 when its program evolution finally stopped. See, it evolved then further into the famous MK Ultra, in which CIA enlisted the help of all kinds of very interesting persons to manipulate and control the minds of human beings. They used techniques such as radiation poisoning, LSD and other drugs, psychotropics, whatnot, to try to control people's minds, sensory deprivation, verbal and physical assault, and sexual abuse, and torture. Now, here's the thing. They did this on U.S. and Canadian citizens unwittingly. Some were actually black bag captured, hood over their head, from their own homes in the middle of the night. This is not conspiracy theory. This is fact. It is researchable. It is documented. Netflix actually just came out with a really interesting, replay of this. So we know about these things, but no one's done anything about it. So they said that they purposely picked people who would not fight back, quote unquote. They picked people who were strung out on drugs, military servicemen who had no choice, prisoners, hospital patients. They in fact covered over 80 institutions throughout the United States for this project. They commandeered universities, hospitals, prisons, and of course pharmaceutical companies that they own. And so they made this gigantic scope that they focused on for over 20 years on how to control people's minds, including unwittingly and unconsciously forcing somebody against their will to commit an assassination. Project MK Ultra evolved one step further that we know of to Project MK Naomi, in which Project MK Naomi, we don't know the full information of that program. But it supposedly took this even further, and they went to try to study black magic. That one we do know the evolutionary stage from that project. It's called MK Often. Project MK Often, this is backed by the CIA using your tax money again, so let's be clear. This is something that you fund, I fund. My taxes, some portion of it somewhere, has gone to feed the CIA. Project MK Often, they wanted to study the extent and proliferation of black magic. They enlisted the help of shamanists, divination professionals, mediums, Satanists, psychic tarot card readers, everybody that they can think of that could imbue any kind of spiritual or occult power to them. Sounds like somebody else I know through history, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was obsessed with the occult. I don't have time to go into all of that because it's not actually a part of this documentation, but Adolf Hitler was absolutely enraptured with everything and anything that had to do with opening portals to hell. So in a later video that I'll be covering over all kinds of different spirituality and esotericism, because not all of it is actually evil, I'm going to be covering all kinds of different topics like that, but I will show you a huge example of some of the world's most powerful leaders that have all been imbued with occult knowledge. Let's see here. So these are projects that are funded by the Central Intelligence Agency, or the Center for Interrogations and Assassinations, as I like to call them, and they have had their hands in almost everything. Until one person, who, though I despise him in his character and even in his politics, is still an American hero because up until recently, he was one of the last freely elected presidents within the United States. And of course, I'm talking about John Fitzgerald Kennedy. JFK he's got some shadowy stuff to him as well. The Kennedy family, there's 50 hours worth of YouTube footage I could do talking about them, and the link to the Onassis family's bloodline within the Illuminati. So he's a golden boy who became not their golden boy because he actually said, hey, you guys control all of the gold, literally, and he hated that concept. So JFK issued Executive Order 11,110 to bring us back to the silver standard in June of '63. He created that executive order. Later, he said in about September or October, a famous quote in which he said that we are opposed around the globe by a monolithic conspiracy over involving the financial industry, the military-industrial complex, and the CIA. And before I leave this high and mighty noble office, I will expose this conspiracy, and I will splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. That's almost a verbatim quote because I've seen that speech so many times. And of course, we all know November 22nd, 1963, so just a couple months later, JFK was showed with a bullet that is not what the cabal wants. So you have a president who says we need to get out of Vietnam, we need to leave Fidel Castro alone and not get into a nuclear war and a proxy war, therefore, with Russia. And of course, the CIA was making tons of money fighting Russia, so why would they not? And then he says, oh, and by the way, I think I want to give Americans back their financial sovereignty, and I'm going to destroy an entire federal organization that has done a lot of damage and imported massive amounts of drugs from the Vietnam crisis into America, and strung out and depended tons and tons of people, etc. So this whole organization is evil. JFK recognized it, and he was assassinated. Story goes, he was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald, who was assassinated by Jack Ruby, who he himself was then assassinated. So all the loose ends are gone. Of course, that's the most classic conspiracy theory. Everybody knows about the magic bullet. Everybody knows about the grassy knoll and all of the other shooting locations because it's exactly what they were. The CIA has full asset teams that they put in place. They don't leave anything to chance. They don't take one person, they don't take one experimental mind control program and see if it'll work on a president. They had a firing squad of several different positions set up, and they ensured that he was going to die. The fact that he made it to a hospital at all is interesting and possibly debatable. But that bullet that they pulled from his head was perfectly clean, unfired, not deformed in any way. Yeah, I don't buy that. That's not what happens to a bullet when it hits something hard like a human skull. Everything's wrong with the physics in that video. Everything's wrong with the directionality of the entrance and exit wounds. I've watched it way too many times and way too many documentaries about it for me to be convinced that Lee Harvey Oswald did it because he was really mad at the United States because he wanted to go back to Russia. It's not what happened, guys. Then take into mind, there's a lot of symbolism that happened there. As I said earlier, the Illuminati had always had symbology of the Freemasons that they have taken, twisted, and perverted. So I find it interesting that JFK was assassinated on the 33rd degree parallel, within longitude and latitude, 33rd degree parallel, in Dealey Plaza, which has a Masonic capstone dedication right in the middle of the square, which that's another emblem as well. And then, there's the triple bypass for the freeway there in Dealey Plaza. And of course, this occurred on 63, 6 being a double of 3. So there's a lot of interesting symbolism that took place within that assassination day. They don't do these things just randomly. These things are created and brought out by ritual. They're occultists. And so if you've studied the occult at all, you know that all that simply means is hidden. Occult in and of itself is actually not a bad word. It's not an evil word. It just means something that is hidden, not known to most people. Arcane is another word. So if you study things that are arcane, you eventually learn some of these concepts, secrets, and ideologies. Some can be used for good, and many can be used for evil. That's exactly what's happening, is a covert war of an ideology between good and evil. That's why you have the Eye of Providence sign with the Eye of God in it, representing deity. And then you also have the Illuminati using that as their same symbol. And that eye is the third eye, or the internal component, basically signifying the godhood of man himself. You don't need the Eye of Providence to watch you. You are your own God. That's the message behind that. It's the message behind deistic Satanism, humanist Satanism, all kinds of things, Gnosticism. So all of these philosophies are definitely in play, and you have to literally look no further than some of the things that have been coming out right now. You have, I just posted an article from Fox News about a Sweden climatologist saying that the best thing to do for global climate change control is to engage in cannibalism. You have the freaking governor of Virginia saying, hey, well, you know what? We don't actually have to worry about abortion. We can just let babies die, right? After they're born, we can just leave them on a table, let them get comfortable, and then they can starve themselves to death. That's satanic, people. The abortion industry is satanic. It is absolutely not about women or about healthcare. I have women in my life that I love. I have a mother, a wife, I have daughters. I care very much about their healthcare. You don't do healthcare by killing people. That's against the Hippocratic Oath. Above all else, do no harm. To take scissors and jam them into a fetal brain stem, slice off arms and limbs while they're still alive, burning them with saline, sucking them out with vacuums, etc. That's not healthcare, guys. Don't be deceived by the mainstream media trying to pit people against each other. It's all done for blood ritual. I'll explain that in a much later video. The last thing that I want to cover is, of course, the anniversary of September 11th. I'm sorry, this video is a lot longer than I'd planned, but there's a lot of information here that I wanted to cover. So I will try to do this as expeditiously as possible. So we got to go back a little bit to understand 9/11. 9/11, of course, had George W. Bush as the pilot at the helm, so to speak. His first year in office. George W. Bush had a father, and his father had a father, Prescott Bush. Prescott Bush was the financial architect of the Nazi Party. It's a fact. You can Google it. His assets were seized in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act. He financed and banked for the Staatstruppen for up to $300 million at that time. He and his family built their wealth off of financing the enemy in Germany. It is a fact that is not disputed. It is verifiable. Prescott Bush was a Nazi banker. His son, George H.W. Bush, of course, we already covered, he was in Skull and Bones. His Skull and Bones nickname, ironically, is Magog, as in Gog and Magog from Revelation. You'll never guess what the son's name was, Gog. So it started off as temporary, and then he didn't like that, and he got to pick his own, so he modeled it after his father. So Gog and Magog are the two Bush nicknames within the Skull and Bones. So if you think that the Bushes were wonderful Presbyterian, Christian, right-wing, conservative Republicans, that's refer to my quote about Mark Twain. So they have a long family legacy of the Walkers and the Bushes, all being in Skull and Bones, all learning occult symbolism, all engaging in the Skull and Bones initiation ritual, in which initiates are made to lie naked in a coffin and repeat for everyone present their sexual histories. They are then beaten and urinated on, and then they become bonesmen. Not an initiation ritual I would want to endure. They've done all kinds of other crazy things, stealing Geronimo's skull, etc. Google it, it's fun. So we now have George W. Bush continuing on, a war in the Middle East that had started under his father from the Gulf War. His father, of course, was one of the heads of the CIA, and was a CIA operative in Texas at the time that JFK was assassinated, so you can put two and two together there. George Bush, of course, has as his vice president Dick Cheney, probably one of the most villainous scum that has ever walked the earth. I refer you to the movie Vice that just recently came out not too long ago. If you'd like some more information on that lovely, lovely character and all of his treasonous plots to take over the United States, which he did. So the official story, we have, Muhammad Atta, Abdulaziz Al-Omari, can't ever remember that guy's name, and Hani Hanjour, hijacking planes, hijacking Flight 11, 175, 77, and United 93. And on September 11th at 8:46 in the morning, our world forever changed as the first plane slammed into the first tower. What happened from there is the subject of the conspiracy and the debates and everything. Of course, you have Flight 175 at 9:03 hitting the second tower, Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon about at 9:57, and then at 10:08, United 93 crashes out in Pennsylvania. What they don't tell you is the plane that hit World Trade Center 7. Oh wait, there wasn't one. That building just fell in free fall speed, at the speed of gravity, on an implosion basis. You can watch the squibs from the detonations go off if you watch the video. That's why there aren't many of them. There's an interesting flub in which a newscaster announces World Trade Center 7 has collapsed as it's standing in the background, and then as she's live talking about it, it collapses, and then they cut the feed really quickly. Supposedly started by an office fire from the debris. So I have seen a lot of buildings catch on fire throughout different news posts. Never seen a building come down on itself at the exact same time with all of the support beams and everything on there. The interesting thing is that's where all of the U.S. money was kept that was owned in accounts by the CIA. Pardon me. You have Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, talking on September 10th about how America is missing $0.23 trillion of unaccounted for money. It's anyone's guess as to where that money actually went. But it's not something that is just going to ever come up. You don't disappear that kind of money into one portfolio somewhere. So you have that issue with World Trade Center 7. You have the fact that jet fuel melts it catches on fire and burns at a temperature of 1,517 degrees Fahrenheit, and steel melts at 2,777 degrees. And of course, the number one answer to that from 9/11, official statement, folks, is, well, it loses its integrity at 1,200 degrees. It's when it starts to become weak and wobble, and of course you had carpet and office furniture and papers catching on fire to increase it. But to that I say, the actual melting point, again, is 2.7 thousand degrees. How do you get this? There were almost every single major support beam in the World Trade Center buildings cut at a 45-degree angle. Let's do that again, with molten slag coming down the side. Which, if you watch a YouTube video on nanothermite, or just thermite in general, nanothermite is the high-tech version that they found in the wreckage. That's an official thing. It was found right there chemically on those things, nanothermite. That means that the support beams were cut. You can watch as the building falls, explosions in the floors below it from squibs. We have countless eye and ear witness videos from actual employees that did make it out of the building saying that they heard explosions within their building before the plane was ever even anywhere near striking the tower. So, I'm thinking that doesn't make sense. When I start to put these things together, the 9/11 Commission is one of the biggest loads of hogwash that has ever been sold to the United States. And it was sold at a price that we gladly paid for with the U.S. Patriot Act. Patriot Act allowed the government to go through and garnish and gleam and take every bit of your information anywhere they want to, anytime they want to, superseding all of your amendment rights under the guise of terrorism. We got the lovely TSA, which has not stopped one single terrorist attack at all since its inception. It has confiscated weapons and such, so it's possible that they prevented one, but nothing official that has ever been published saying, hey, there was a major plot and the TSA, they stopped it. It's never happened. You'll never see that headline because this was engineered by us. See, the really crazy thing about it is September 10th, the world's most wanted man was supposedly plotting in Afghani on the behest of Saudi Arabia so that we could go to war with Iraq, was plotting a gigantic coup against the United States at the same time that his brother Shafiq bin Laden was meeting with the Carlyle Group, financial group, in New York with George H.W. Bush. September 10th. When they did the hunt for Osama bin Laden, it's really weird that he was actually treated at a U.S. hospital in, I believe, Guam. But, we were looking for him in caves. So, somebody was actually taking care of him in one of the U.S. consulates. But, he wasn't the man that they were after. That's why we went to Iraq and took out Saddam Hussein, right? You see, all of this revolves around their God. Their God is different than my God and your God, regardless of our religion. The Cabal's God, G-O-D, is gold, which they already got, oil, and drugs. G-O-D, God, oil, drugs. That is who our highest, most elite personnel within the U.S. government worships. So, you also have issues with the Pentagon. I've been right by that road. I've seen many security cameras all over everywhere that had already been in existence, like at the gas station right across the street. So there were over 86 security cameras, all with footage in or around the area that was affected by the plane that hit the Pentagon. There has only been, from one angle, 5 still frame seconds released of the very small explosion. And I say small in comparison to when you watch the jetliners slam into a tower and gigantic fireballs engulfing the whole thing. The fireball that hit on the Pentagon is nowhere near the same scale. What happened was a cruise missile hit the Pentagon. I forward you to a higher authority than my conspiracy theories. Major General Albert Stumblebine, it's this guy, I'm going to read his quote verbatim. I saw a missile hitting the Pentagon, not a plane. All of the sensors were turned off on that day. One apparently did not turn off, and it showed this object hitting the Pentagon, and it did not look to me like an airplane. At each floor, successive puffs of smoke are seen, all the way down, and those puffs of smoke are due to controlled demolitions. The collapse of the Twin Towers as well was caused by controlled demolition. Major General Albert Stumblebine. They also had him on an interview that has since been scrubbed from YouTube. I've not been able to find it, or I would have pulled it up, saying that the entirety of the hallways post-hit on the Pentagon smelled of cordite. Cordite, of course, is a chemical compound found within things like bullets, shells, and other explosives. You don't have cordite on an airplane. Notably, missing from the scene there at the Pentagon were 2 giant Rolls-Royce engines. Damage from where the wings would have hit. There's nothing but a circle, so there's no spot for the tail prop either. I'm not an aviist myself, but I would think that those things don't just instantly vaporize into dust, especially without having done some damage to the actual structure of the building. So, you have things like the black boxes from all of these planes missing. There's no wreckage of United 93 to indicate that a commercial liner went down at all. Look at it. There's no plane there. Black boxes are vaporized, yet we find passports. We find intact passports of these terrorists, and that way on 9/12, if you look at some of those old newspapers, it had a list of all the known terrorists that were on board those planes that hijacked them. I find that really convenient. So there's all kinds of stuff like that, and then take into account the fact that World Trade Center 7, United 93, and the Pentagon sites were all immediately covered over and paved. All of the debris and damage taken in biohazmat trucks and whatnot and shipped off to some undisclosed location. No one knows where it went to, but they were not able to do any kind of full inspection or go through. You would think this is a giant major crime. Why would they not have investigative teams out there for forever combing through every bit of information, right? Well, one of the first people out there, besides first responders, was cement companies to pour over everything. It was a parking lot afterwards. They got rid of every bit of evidence they could possibly find to support, hey, a plane hit. It's not a missile, guys. Look, here's the this, that. All of it's gone. None of it can ever be reinvestigated again. So the patriotism that we all felt, all of us coming together as one, singing the national anthem and God Bless America, waving our flags around, that was wonderful. All of us remember where we were during 9/11. Those of us that are old enough to remember it anyway. It forced us into a sense of patriotism and loyalty that has not been felt since. But unfortunately, all of that was to bend our minds to war. Because I have several friends that might be watching this actually that joined up because of that attack. They joined into the military, wanting to serve their country and give those bastards hell and get back to them. That's not what happened, though. And so as people start to realize this giant ploy and conspiracy, the waking up part is the hardest to do. It's taken me a long, long time to come to grips with it, and then even longer to debate doing this. So I hope I've given some information. I know I haven't been able to be as comprehensive as I would like. Videos like the loose change video that came out after 9/11, even though it had some flaws to it, still display some of the theories a little bit better than I've been able to articulate them. But this is just a sampling to kind of put together this theme and show the weave that's been done, not by me, but by many, many smarter people than I that have investigated this and taken it quite seriously. For example, Jim Marrs, famous historian, he's the one who has just been like a hound dog on the JFK story. So in light of tomorrow being what it is, I would say this: continue to show your patriotism, show your pride in our country. We're finally making America great again. The perpetrators of these crimes still have not been brought to justice. Justice is a term that I value very dearly, and I believe that there will be a day in which a true accounting comes for all of this, and some of these classified and sealed documents that would support crazy conspiracy kooks like myself's ideas, I think they will come to light someday. That day is not tomorrow, however. So in reflection, remember the victims and the families that did truly lose loved ones. Care about everybody that you talk to, because you have no idea what people are going through. And again, remember, this affects all of us. So to use JFK's boat's motto, where we go one, we go all. God bless you all. God bless America, and have a wonderful night.